I am a refugee of Saddam's genocide. We fled after the massacre of the Kurdish people in the north. You know, they say don't judge a book by its cover, but in the U.S. right now, as far as towards the Muslim community, that's exactly what they're doing. They're judging the action of a few people and basing it on the whole majority. After 9/11, I had a knock from the FBI at my door. And he brought out a questionnaire, starting off with such questions as like, are you a part of Al-Qaeda? I told him over and over, I came here when I was around 7. And I didn't know nothing about back home. I didn't know what Osama is. I'm not even from the same region as Osama. But I guess my Middle Eastern last name and my Muslim descent automatically makes me a prime suspect in 9/11. Racial profiling's out there, and I am a prime example of it.
Racial profiling is when you stop someone, when you believe someone is involved in an illegal activity simply because of the color of their skin or because of their racial or ethnic characteristics, or because you believe they're members of a particular religious group. The truth of the matter is it affects everyone. If we live in a community in which any segment of our community is discriminated against, and any segment of our community is actually the target of racial profiling, it undercuts the effectiveness of law enforcement for everyone in those communities.
I mean, it's funny how sometimes you're always in the wrong part of the neighborhood. I didn't even know there's such a thing as a wrong part of the neighborhood, especially in America. Like, yeah, I thought you were free to go wherever you want, whenever you want. I was pulled over sort of late night, accused of being, as he put it, suspicious activity. So I was pulled over, Bill Mead area, asked for my license, my registration, my insurance. I had it all. I showed him everything. He's like, okay. So I'm interrogated, a couple hours of interrogations out in the cold in the boxes, and the other cops just having casual conversation, making me look like the fool. And I mean, that's tough, being a kid, but that's, sometimes you go through that. I mean, at the end, I was let go. No citation, no ticket, no reason. Only because, in my opinion, I was a Muslim kid in the wrong part of the neighborhood. So they said. I mean, I've seen a lot in my life. But to be degraded, I wasn't worried about stripped down of my clothes. Being stripped of my dignity was what I had a problem with. I mean, to run away from the injustices, only to come back and face it, that was tough. This is still the land of opportunity. This is America. People flee from other countries to come to a beautiful place like this. But sometimes they don't realize the harsh reality of it. Every beautiful face has an ugly side to it.
Just being an African-American male in America, male of color in general, especially with the way America is reflecting black and brown people in this country, it's difficult not to encounter it at some point. I actually had a case sitting in front of my house, me and 2 other men. Police jumped out, pulled guns on us, put it at our heads, and said they were looking for someone who had stolen some equipment. And I showed him that I lived at that location. And then he vociferously apologized, hoping that I would not tell any of his superiors about it. What's happening in Detroit is a subsection of what's happening in the United States. In New York, Philadelphia, Atlanta, New Orleans, Seattle, Washington, San Antonio. And the work that I have done, many of the people that have died, the 300 funerals that we've gone to, many of them have started with the profiling in terms of who the person happens to be. This is, for instance, Eric Williams. This is a homeless man shot by a state trooper. Everybody knew him. They didn't know him to be violent. This young lady here was shot in an altercation with the police. This young man here was a father, had 4 children, was just walking home and was stopped by the police. He never made it home. It gets to the heart of the thing that this is really about the question of humanity, and it's more tragic than one could imagine. I don't know whether it's a blessing or a curse to be given this kind of work, but we do what we do.
Communities across America are being affected by racial profiling, whether it's driving while black, flying while brown, walking around while Latino. Racial profiling clearly violates our Constitution, our right to equal protection under the law, our right to due process. People need to be identified not simply because of their race or their religion or their national origin. When law enforcement does that, it starts to undermine the confidence of communities in the very law enforcement that is there to serve and protect them.
9 months pregnant is arrested, handcuffed, and thrown in a jail for a week, all according to police for not having a driver's license. According to the woman, it's because she's Hispanic. So is this a case of racial profiling?
Se siente uno mal, como le digo yo al policía le rogué que no me llevara a la cárcel porque me faltaban de 3 a 4 días para aliviarme al bebé, pero ni eso, no sé ni decirle cómo, ni porque también mis hijos los dejé llorando en el carro, me sentía muy mal. Se me rompió la fuente para tener a mi bebé. Cuando llegamos al hospital, que me subieron a la cama cuando carreran que suben a la cama, me tuvieron expulsada de esta mano y del pie. Por decir, me alivié el domingo, tuve 3 días en el hospital. Yo no supe si a mi hijo se lo habían entregado a mi esposo, como a mi esposo no lo dejaban verme. Yo no supe si se lo habían entregado a él o no, como no me dejaban hablar por teléfono ni nada.
One of the things that I've noticed over my 21 years in law enforcement is a historical relationship of racial profiling with African Americans, is that you now start seeing it with immigration and starting to pour in to other communities. And so you get the same feel when you were talking about immigration enforcement and the laws in Arizona. You got the same feel after 9/11 with our Arabs, our friends there, and Middle Easterns. So you can see that when strong events happen, that racialized issues become more apparent.
I grew up in Michigan. Most of my life I've lived in Michigan. I have traveled extensively, whether it was for studies or whether it was for human rights research. But I have really spent most of my life in Michigan. I have to say I'm a Detroit girl, although I like the West Coast. My sister and I, we are very frequent travelers. We were vacationing in Argentina. We're flying back to the United States. We had already gone through the initial screening. We had gone through the secondary pat-down, but when we were about to board the flight at the gate, after we had presented our boarding pass, we were pulled aside by TSA agents and asked to remove our head covering. So asking us to remove our hijab in public, if you can imagine being asked to remove your underwear and removing it in public, that's really what that feeling is going to feel like. They took us back out through the security to a public bathroom. We were patted down. The bathroom was crowded. I remember that there were people going in and out of the bathrooms, and they were asking, why did you select these women, and have you done this to anyone else? And there was another woman that was, putting her head covering back on, and I will never forget, she was shaking. She was shaking. She looked like she had been thoroughly humiliated, and obviously the same thing happened to my sister and myself.
What can be done to stop racial profiling is this. First, we need strong national legislation that would ban racial profiling at the federal, state, and local level. The End Racial Profiling Act is a bill that would do exactly that, and we urge Congress to pass it. The second thing we need is the Department of Justice to strengthen their guidance on the use of race by law enforcement. And finally, we really need to see the Department of Homeland Security stop using state and local law enforcement and to enforce civil immigration law. Racial profiling doesn't work. It's not effective law enforcement. It doesn't make us safer. And at the end of the day, it just doesn't make sense.